May the good Samaritan do likewise. Now, members of the House, what then are we saying? We are saying that for there to be a problem, for us to analyze a problem, we must first find out the cause. And the cause here, according to the World Economic Forum, is that countries that lack transparency have high corruption rate. We as the government are saying that transparency in government bond issuance is going to help us solve this problem that we have as a country. Ladies and gentlemen, picture this: two taxis. One taxi, in taxi A, there is a gauge that tells you the route and how much you're going to pay at the end of the ride. Taxi B, there is a driver who says, get in and trust me, I will charge you fairly at the end of the ride. Which taxi would you board? Certainly it's taxi A. We are saying that transparency is the government telling the public what they are going to do with the money, how much that they have, and when they'll return it. Ladies and gentlemen, that will build trust between the people, demand for accountability, reduce corruption, and furthermore, attract high quality investors because they trust and believe in the government. Ladies and gentlemen, transparency is the answer. We are not saying that government bonds are not needed. We are saying that let there be transparency so that we honor our IMF agreement. With these few but convincing points, I, Daryl Danzi, rest my case.
Thank you so much, honorable member. So, to the audience, I know we're enjoying. However, please let's desist from discouraging the speakers on the podium. As a matter of fact, we should encourage them, yeah? So let's take note of that. Thank you. At this point, let's please welcome the member of the opposition to come and make his submission.
Rotten fish cannot be sweet in any soup. Members of the House, may I please be allowed to first note and quantify distinguished speakers, members of the House, my distinguished judges, please all protocols observed. The Bank of Zambia, as a fiscal agent of the government of the Republic of Zambia, in the issuance of government securities, made a public announcement at the end of the first quarter of 2026. In this public announcement, members of the public, they revised the auction frequency in the second quarter. They changed it from twice. It was changed from once every month to twice every quarter. In doing so, members of the House, they have already cut down the auction frequency. Members of the House, let it be known that in this revised reforms that they have made, the government of the House also introduced new benchmark bonds, which they clearly stated on their portals as well as in their newspapers and in every form and way they've made possible through their mobile platforms such as Facebook and social securities. With that said, members of the House, the introduction of a twice per quarter instead of a monthly auction requires me, as a general member, to have not allowed 6 members of the House. In order for me, as a retiree who has worked hard and earned his money, it requires me, for me to have a monthly coupon payment for a semi-annual coupon bond, I will be required to buy 6 auction bids separately. Now, with the removal of a monthly auction bid, how will I be able to sustain my living by not being able to have these 6 options to buy the bid? Members of the House, let it be known that in order for me to facilitate the semi-annual coupon payment to enable myself to make this money every single month, it would require me to make 6 of these.
The Honorable speaking before us makes a very, very valid point. It's not fair for a change to just be announced that's going to affect his economic future. So would it be better if at least the least that would be done was transparency so that he knows why that change has been made, so that he can make better decisions?
How am I going to be able to sustain my day-to-day living as a retiree?
Your time is up.
Summarize, please.
Go ahead.
How am I going to sustain myself as a retiree and be able to sustain my day-to-day living after working and having blood, sweat, and tears on my hands, members of the House, and not being able to facilitate those payments when I'm still going to have to pay more and receive less at the end of these government bonds? Knowing is not the problem. The problem, rather, is what we do with what we know. May the House kindly allow me to present my evidence as well.
Sometimes I think some of you should be philosophers or something. Knowing isn't the problem, but what you do with what you know. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for the honorable member. Okay, we are down to the last two speakers. They will speak for 5 minutes each, and they are immune to interjections. We begin with the whip of the government. A round of applause for him.
When the people needed hope, they turned to a black man in America named Barack Obama. Today, people need hope, and they've turned to a black man who comes from the land of copper, on the copper belt, Kaimba Mwansa Chanda. Now, members of the House and indeed bona fide intellectuals, the motion under fundamental scrutiny states, as I quote, "This House believes that increasing transparency," and please note, increasing transparency in government bond issuance is more important than increasing the frequency of issuances, end of quotation. But before I go any further, it would be very unwise of a speaker of my caliber to go on without offering my humble benedictions to the highly esteemed in this House of Debate by simply saying, "May all diplomatic etiquette be highly and formally observed." Now, members of the House, as the summarizer, it is my distinct duty to do three things. It's my distinct duty to firstly rebuttal the invalidities that were brought before this August House. And I'm going to do it in order. There were so many members of the House, but I think I'll just pick out like 3 or 4. Members of the House and indeed bona fide intellectuals. Their first speaker talked about reduced frequency and liquidity. Now, members of the House, this motion is not arguing whether there is no transparency or whether there is no liquidity. Currently, we do have liquidity. Currently, we do have some form of transparency, but we're talking about what has to be increased. Now, members of the House, the reason why we as the government do not agree with the statements that were made by the first speaker from the opposition is because when we look at the history of our economic situation as Zambia, members of the House, in 2005, we had our debt wiped out. We were given a second chance. What did we do? We increased liquidity. We didn't increase transparency. And between 2014 to 2019, our government borrowed money. They bought euro bonds, members of the House. Those euro bonds that were got by our government, members of the House, were for the price of 3 billion US dollars, members of the House. And then what happens in 2020, members of the House? Mother Zambia does something that is so unprecedented to become the first country in Africa to default, members of the House, which was such a big embarrassment, members of the House, clearly showing that the problem is not with increasing liquidity. The problem is not with the liquidity. The problem is with the transparency. When you are more transparent, you give more wise people a chance to make proper decisions. It's easier for people to decide to put money in something if they know where that money is going. If they know the rate at which you owe some people, it's easier for you to even come up with ways to explain, to say, oh, the reason we are in this debt, the reason we borrowed, the reason we made this decision is because of A, B, C, and D. But the problem is we are increasing liquidity and not telling our investors and our people the reason why we are increasing the liquidity. And members of the House and indeed bona fide intellectuals, to show that I'm a speaker who's speaking from within the confines of debate, with me is a few articles. One article from the IMF that was already quoted by my second speaker. The IMF had one of its writers, Yang Lee, write this: disclosing public debt boosts investor confidence, cuts borrowing costs, and also greater debt transparency builds investor confidence and helps reduce borrowing costs and strengthens debt sustainability, reducing the risk of shocks that can lead to debt crisis. And this debt crisis, members of the House, is what we as Zambia were already facing. We faced it twice, members of the House. Who are we, if not people who need to learn from their past in order to make a more sustainable and illuminated future? May the Good Samaritan please do likewise. And members of the House and indeed bona fide intellectuals, to show how unprecedented the problems that we as Zambia have faced in the past are. When we look at the statistics that show in comparison to the other countries in terms of borrowing, the rest of the SADC region, members of the House, as written by the WFD, borrowed only an average debt increase of 49.2%. But we as Zambia, our debt increased by 70%, members of the House. And this is just in a period of 10 years, members of the House, clearly showing that there is a problem. We are increasing liquidity, we are not increasing transparency. And because we are increasing liquidity and not transparency, everyone is benefiting and also facing the problems that result from not increasing transparency. Because if you don't increase transparency, the problem is that we keep on adding money, putting money into the government, thinking that everything is okay, when in actual sense, things are not okay. And when something goes wrong, the government will still stay, they'll still have the borrowing power, even though it will be restricted. But what happens to you and me, who have bought these coupons, who have kept on investing in this government? We face the problem, and the problem is that the debt restructuring that eventually follows is going to hinder the amount of money you are meant to get. And it's unfair for someone to pay for the cost that they were not initially told about. It's like a Ponzi scheme, members of the House, at the end of the day, if you do not know what you're putting your money in. Can I please have 20 seconds to summarize?
Please go ahead.
So members of the House and indeed bona fide intellectuals, let's not allow the opposition to make us think or to make us assume that the liquidity that we, the government, are talking about is going to be completely shut down. But no, what we are saying is there needs to be increased transparency. Yes, there's some transparency as already stated, but there needs to be increased transparency over increased liquidity, as we do not want to make the same mistakes that we made in the past. With these few points, I raise my case.
Members of the House, I have a question. Considering the order of speakers, the first speaker is the Prime Minister. I noticed the whip is the one that got a standing, what do you call it, standing welcome. Shouldn't the Prime Minister get more respect in terms of the order of government? I think that's why it's a good thing to be a very good speaker. You get quite a lot of respect. Ladies and gentlemen, let's please welcome the whip of the opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, the judges, I salute you. To my opponents, it's been a good one, hasn't it? Ladies and gentlemen, I greet you today as another man from the Copper Belt, sent all the way to Texila American University. My name is Damian Bubala Hamonga, and I am the summarizer of the opposition today. Someone once told me a good speech is like a mini skirt. It must be short enough to be interesting and long enough to cover all the parts that need to be covered. And that's what I'm here to do for you today. But before I dive into my speech, I'm going to note a few things that the proposition made that I feel were mistakes. First of all, an open window and an open door. Zambia's been living in a glass house. The Bank of Zambia most of the Bank of Zambia documents are public documents. And if you look at how it goes for you to get a bond, every single thing is scrutinized. When you go to the internet, every single question you ask about the bonds is given. All my previous members have given you what you need to know. They've given you all the details and how Bank of Zambia simply stipulates how you must get a bond and what comes with that bond. They even give you the dates. They brought up about the nation borrowing from IMF and other places. But how is that stopping us from getting more money from within? Investor confidence is what we're building, isn't it? Ladies and gentlemen, they are talking about how we are borrowing from outside but not letting our own people invest into their own country. That is how we build a country. Now I start my speech. Honorable adjudicators, it was never about whether transparency is important. We all know that transparency is important. Transparency has been there from the start. Transparency has been there from the get-go. The question that is given to this house, members and ladies and gentlemen, is what is more important? As every one of my speakers has told you, it's not just about transparency. You cannot build without a foundation. So, my first point is frequency creates a functioning market. The more money that's put into the economy is how bigger the economy grows, ladies and gentlemen. Government needs continuous funding. The funding from the people is what grows our government. It's what builds our country. It's what grows our roads. It's what builds our schools, ladies and gentlemen. Predictability builds investor confidence. Each and every single bond issuance date is given you the beginning and how it will end, your maturities, and every single thing that you are given. Ladies and gentlemen, here, World Bank stipulates how medium-term debt management strategies and gives us a framework of how best countries will deal with this. May the Good Samaritan please do as well. So, the government of the day talked about how Zambia has moved from 2005, has moved and has been borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. But let me tell you one thing, that is not a matter of whether the bonds are being given out or not. That's simply a matter of corruption that you as the government should look into. Second thing, the last speaker talked about borrowing costs. Frequent issuance increases market participation and competition, which also contributes to more efficient pricing over time. Transparency is only one factor that affects borrowing. As I highlight what the proposition failed to prove, they did not demonstrate how increasing transparency alone expands the bond market, because Zambia is very transparent. They overlooked the economic costs of reduced infrequent borrowing. As we saw, the Bank of Zambia reduced their auction rates from once a month to twice a quarter. They focused on ideals, while our team focused on a practical economic growth and market development. It is stated when to apply for the bond, and it was put through severe scrutiny. Honorable adjudicators, today it's about priorities. Transparency is valuable, but it cannot replace the active bond market which grows this very country we live in, Zambia. And I did take note that the third speaker talked about getting into one taxi that has a simple counter that tells you how far you're going to go and how much you're going to pay. And the other one, the driver tells you, I will charge you fairly. That is simply ignorance and lack of preparation. You must know what you get into before you start. And that's what the government of Zambia has been giving you every time you buy a single bond. Ladies and gentlemen, I leave this platform today by giving you one final statement. Frequency builds the market, transparency improves it, but the foundation must come first. With these few words, I close. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I don't want to mistake what he said. A good speech must be like a miniskirt, yes? Short enough to cover everything? Or short enough to be interesting? Okay, okay. And long enough to cover the essentials. Nice. You guys should really be philosophers. A round of applause for the gentleman. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this particular debate. I'll allow the debaters to shake hands as they take their seats. Let's give a round of applause to both teams. Okay, so for purposes of changing the placards, the next debate is between the University of Lusaka and Eden University. Is Eden in the house? Okay, so placards can be changed for the next debate. We'll also allow the judges to just compile the results for this one. We'll be starting shortly. Thank you.
Really wanting to risk collapsing of our market just so that we can include an entity that is proving itself to be substandard.
But from 2015 up to 2026, .com has been the only entity to join that platform. And you cannot say that.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a clear indication that institutional investors pull a lot of money from many people, therefore prioritizing institutional investors.
Members of the House, you should understand the fact that if this basically happens, we have more liquidity. I repeat again. And once we have more liquidity, this means that if securities are basically done, it reduces the interest rates that are basically supposed to be imposed. So,
members of association, our ability will rise to the notion, rise in firm support to the notion in motion which stipulates as I articulate. This House believes that Zambia should prioritize
the ground. They don't need five years of profits continually in order for them to be listed, but they can be listed in one of four ways. Firstly, they can be listed by having a business which has been running for at least 5 years, or simply provide revenues for the last 3 years. They can have
small economic, for micro and small medium enterprises. Really a beautiful mission statement. Ladies and gentlemen, countrymen and women, it is important.
Really wanting to risk collapsing of our market just so that we can include an entity that is proving itself to be substandard.
But from 2015 up to 2026, .com has been the only entity to join that platform. And you cannot say that.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a clear indication that institutional investors pull a lot of money from many people, therefore prioritizing institutional investors.
members of the House, you should understand the fact that if this basically happens, we have more liquidity. I repeat again. And once we have more liquidity, this means that if securities are basically done, it reduces the interest rates that are basically supposed to be imposed. So,
members of association, our ability will rise to the notion, rise in firm support to the notion in motion which stipulates as I articulate. This House believes that Zambia should prioritize
the ground. They don't need five years of profits continually in order for them to be listed, but they can be listed in one of four ways. Firstly, they can be listed by having a business which has been running for at least 5 years, or simply provide revenues for the last 3 years. They can have
small economic, for micro and small medium enterprises. Really a beautiful mission statement. Ladies and gentlemen, countrymen and women, it is important.
We need to understand that the market is not just about money, it's also about trust. Before I go any further, really wanting to risk collapsing of our market just so that you can include an entity that is proving itself to be substandard.
But from 2015 up to 2026, .com has been the only entity to join that platform. And you cannot say that.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a clear indication that institutional investors pull a lot of money from many people, therefore prioritizing institutional investors.
Members of the House, we should understand the fact that if this basically happens, we have more liquidity. I repeat again. And once we have more liquidity, this means that securities are basically done. It reduces the interest rates that are basically supposed to be imposed. So,
members of association, our ability will rise to the notion, rise in firm support to the notion in motion which stipulates as articulated. This House believes that Zambia should prioritize
the ground. They don't need five years of profits continually in order for them to be listed, but they can be listed in one of four ways. Firstly, they can be listed by having a business which has been running for at least 5 years, or simply provide revenues for the last 3 years. They can have
small economic, for micro and small medium enterprises. Really a beautiful mission statement. Ladies and gentlemen, countrymen and women, it is
really wanting to risk collapsing of our market just so that you can include an entity that is proving itself to be substandard.
But from 2015 up to 2026, .com has been the only entity to join that platform. And you cannot say that.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a clear indication that institutional investors pull a lot of money from many people, therefore prioritizing institutional investors.
members of the House, we should understand the fact that if this basically happens, we have more liquidity. I repeat again. And once we have more liquidity, this means that if securities are basically done, it reduces the interest rates that are basically supposed to be imposed. So,
members of association, our ability will rise to the notion, rise in firm support to the notion in motion which stipulates as articulated. This House believes that Zambia should prioritize
the ground. They don't need five years of profits continually in order for them to be listed, but they can be listed in one of four ways. Firstly, they can be listed by having a business which has been running for at least 5 years, or simply provide revenues for the last 3 years. They can have
small economic, for micro and small medium enterprises. Really a beautiful mission statement. Ladies and gentlemen, countrymen and women, it is important.
Really wanting to risk collapsing of our market just so that you can include an entity that is proving itself to be substandard.
But from 2015 up to 2026, .com has been the only entity to join that platform. And you cannot say that.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a clear indication that institutional investors pull a lot of money from many people, therefore prioritizing institutional investors.
members of the House, we should understand the fact that if this basically happens, we have more liquidity. I repeat again. And once we have more liquidity, this means that securities are basically done. It reduces the interest rates that are basically supposed to be imposed. So,
members of association, our ability will rise to the notion, rise in firm support to the notion in motion which stipulates as articulated. This House believes that Zambia should prioritize
the ground. They don't need five years of profits continually in order for them to be listed, but they can be listed in one of four ways. Firstly, they can be listed by having a business which has been running for at least 5 years, or simply provide revenues for the last 3 years. They can have
small economic, for micro and small medium enterprises. Really a beautiful mission statement. Ladies and gentlemen, countrymen and women, it is important.
We need to understand that the market is not just about money, it's also about trust. Before I go any further, really wanting to risk collapsing of our market just so that you can include an entity that is proving itself to be substandard.
But from 2015 up to 2026, .com has been the only entity to join that platform. And you cannot say that.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a clear indication that institutional investors pull a lot of money from many people, therefore prioritizing institutional investors.
members of the House, we should understand the fact that if this basically happens, we have more liquidity. I repeat again. And once we have more liquidity, this means that securities are basically done. It reduces the interest rates that are basically supposed to be imposed. So,
members of association, I believe we rise to the notion, rise in firm support to the notion in motion which stipulates the articulate. This House believes that Zambia should prioritize
the ground. They don't need five years of profits continually in order for them to be listed, but they can be listed in one of four ways. Firstly, they can be listed by having a business which has been running for at least 5 years, or simply provide revenues for the last 3 years. They can have
small economic, for micro and small medium enterprises. Really a beautiful mission statement. Ladies and gentlemen, countrymen and women, it is
Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention? So for purposes of preparation, in consideration that the other quarterfinalists already qualified yesterday and have been preparing, so quickly announce the results between Levi, Mwanawasa Medical University and Taxila American University. Quickly do the coin toss and allow them to also begin preparations. Also, this will help to know of the losers which one is still in the race. So we'll start with the best speakers. The second best speaker, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Daman Hamonga. Daman? That's Daman over there. Congratulations. And the best speaker, put your hands together for Kaimba Chanda. That is Kaimba Chanda over there. Thank you. The results are as follows. In the debate between Levi Mwanawasa Medical University and Taxila American University, one institution scored 593 and the other institution scored 660. The institution that qualifies to the quarterfinal, please put your hands together for Levi Mwanawasa Medical University. All right, so the next institutions are Eden University and the University of Lusaka. But before that happens, we'll just quickly do the coin toss for these quarterfinalists so that they can know what sides they will be preparing for. So can I have a representative from LBTC and a representative from Levi Mwanawasa at the back for the coin toss?
Collapsing of our market, just so that we can include an entity that is proving itself to be substandard.
But from 2015 up to 2026, .com has been the only entity to join that platform. And you cannot say that.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a clear indication that institutional investors pull a lot of money from many people, therefore prioritizing institutional investors.
Members of the House, we should understand the fact that if this basically happens, we have more liquidity. I repeat again. And once we have more liquidity, this means that if securities are basically done, it reduces the interest rates that are basically supposed to be imposed. So,
members of association, I believe we rise to the notion, rise in firm support to the notion in motion which stipulates as articulate. This House believes that Zambia should prioritize
the ground. They don't need five years of profits continually in order for them to be listed, but they can be listed in one of four ways. Firstly, they can be listed by having a business which has been running for at least 5 years, or simply provide revenues for the last 3 years. They can have
small economic, for micro and small medium enterprises. Really a beautiful mission statement. Ladies and gentlemen, countrymen and women, it is
wanting to risk collapsing of our market, just so that you can include an entity that is proving itself to be substandard.
But from 2015 up to 2026, .com has been the only entity to join that platform. And you cannot say that.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a clear indication that institutional investors pull a lot of money from many people, therefore prioritizing institutional investors.
Members of the House, we should understand the fact that if this basically happens, we have more liquidity. I repeat again. And once we have more liquidity, this means that if securities are basically done, it reduces the interest rates that are basically supposed to be imposed. So,
members of association, I ability will rise to the notion, rise in firm support to the notion in motion which stipulates as articulate. This House believes that Zambia should prioritize
the ground. They don't need five years of profits continually in order for them to be listed, but they can be listed in one of four ways. Firstly, they can be listed by having a business which has been running for at least 5 years, or simply provide revenues for the last 3 years. They can have
small economic, for micro and small medium enterprises. Really a beautiful mission statement. Ladies and gentlemen, countrymen and women, it is
really wanting to risk collapsing of our market, just so that you can include an entity that is proving itself to be substandard.
But from 2015 up to 2026, .com has been the only entity to join that platform. And you cannot say that.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a clear indication that institutional investors pull a lot of money from many people, therefore prioritizing institutional investors.
members of the House, we should understand the fact that if this basically happens, we have more liquidity. I repeat again. And once we have more liquidity, this means that if securities are basically done, it reduces the interest rates that are basically supposed to be imposed. So,
members of association, our ability will rise to the notion, rise in firm support to the notion in motion which stipulates as articulate. This House believes that Zambia should prioritize
the ground. They don't need five years of profits continually in order for them to be listed, but they can be listed in one of four ways. Firstly, they can be listed by having a business which has been running for at least 5 years, or simply provide revenues for the last 3 years. They can have
small economic, for micro and small medium enterprises. Really a beautiful mission statement. Ladies and gentlemen, countrymen and women, it is important.
Really wanting to risk collapsing of our market, just so that you can include an entity that is proving itself to be substandard.
But from 2015 up to 2026, .com has been the only entity to join that platform. And you cannot say that.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a clear indication that institutional investors pull a lot of money from many people, therefore prioritizing institutional investors.
members of the House, we should understand the fact that if this basically happens, we have more liquidity. I repeat again. And once we have more liquidity, this means that if securities are basically done, it reduces the interest rates that are basically supposed to be imposed. So,
from 2015 up to 2026, .com has been the
members of association, our ability will rise to the notion, rise in firm support to the notion in motion which stipulates as articulate. This House believes that Zambia should prioritize
the ground. They don't need five years of profits continually in order for them to be listed, but they can be listed in one of four ways. Firstly, they can be listed by having a business which has been running for at least 5 years, or simply provide revenues for the last 3 years. They can have
small economic, for micro and small medium enterprises. Really a beautiful mission statement. Ladies and gentlemen, countrymen and women, it is important.
Congratulations to Lembi Manawasa Medical University for making it to the quarterfinals. Unfortunately, the journey ends here for Texila University. Unza still hangs in the balance. Yes, I should keep mentioning. Okay, so the next debate is between the University of Lusaka and Eden University. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the University of Lusaka. University of Lusaka. we will deduct more marks. Okay, while they're coming, there's an announcement that Rockview University has come with a printer. So if you may need to print evidence instead of going all the way outside. Wait. Rockview University are business people, so it's not for free. It's at a cost, but at least it's more convenient, isn't it? Yes, so right within these premises, you're able to print out any evidence that you may need. University of Lusaka. Okay, Eden University, please come forward. So for Eden University, who were not here at the beginning, we had made an announcement that all institutions that came late will be starting with -10. You have a deduction of 10 points because of the time that you came. So that is an encouragement to you to do a good job if you are to proceed to the next round. From what I see, I think the University of Lusaka might also need a deduction because now they are holding us ransom.
Really wanting to risk collapsing of our market just so that you can include an entity that is proving itself to be substandard.
But from 2015 up to 2026.
What? Capital market. The African Capital Market Report of
position. Affiliates of the Sensation, it is with great joy that I strongly oppose to the motion which stipulates as I articulate. A vibrant capital market is the the motion which stipulates as I articulate. A vibrant capital market is the motor market is the
Okay, so the University of Lusaka is here. So like I had mentioned, institutions that came late are beginning with a deduction of 10. Unilas was exempted because they had come on time, but now they also receive a deduction of 10. Okay, so the University of Lusaka is here. The motion they are debating states as follows. This House believes improving liquidity should take precedence over increasing the number of listed securities. Okay, so the University of Lusaka is government. Eden University are the opposition. If you haven't yet written a list of your names in the order that you'll be speaking, please do so for the benefit of the judges. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please a round of applause for the Prime Minister.
Pardon my presidential height. To the Speaker of Parliament, honorable judges, esteemed guests, my salutations. True economic vitality is measured by the steady pulse of capital, not the sheer size of a directory. I take the floor today, ladies and gentlemen, to defend the operational reality of our financial markets. The opposition advances the proposition that the sheer breadth of listed securities is the ultimate measure of a thriving capital market, but we offer the truth. So let us all wake up and smell the roses. Capital that cannot move is capital that cannot grow. The affirmative maintains that liquidity must be our paramount focus. Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, it is imperative that we establish the framework which today's motion ought to be interpreted before advancing our substantive argument. Number one, listed securities. Listed securities, these are financial instruments that are traded on a recognized stock exchange, such as the NSE or BSE in India. They include equities, bonds, debentures, and exchange-traded funds, and other marketable instruments approved by the exchange, a definition given by the Samco Securities. I'll ask the good sir to do likewise. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to define liquidity, the key term in today's topic. If you allow me to enlighten the opposition's dim view on this topic, ladies and gentlemen, this is a concept that can be coined in two aspects. Firstly, monetary liquidity. And this can be termed as the quantity of liquid assets in the economy, which in turn related to the level of interest. And secondly, the one that the government today, ladies and gentlemen, will be taking front is market liquidity, which is generally seen as the measure of the ability of market participants to undertake security transactions without triggering large changes in the prices. A note taken from the Financial Stability Review of June 2007, page 81. I'll ask the good sir to do as likewise. Ladies and gentlemen, as I redefine this topic, you find that at its core, this debate is a choice between building sustainable financial solutions and chasing bureaucratic vanity. It asks whether we should ensure that the fundamental anatomy of the market functions correctly and allowing capital to circulate freely, or bundling graft more companies onto exchange where trading is paralyzed. Ladies and gentlemen, the argument that I pose today is that when we examine the true anatomy of financial market, liquidity is the cardiovascular system. A high volume of listing means absolutely nothing if the capital cannot flow. When a liquidity exchanges obsess over adding new securities, ladies and gentlemen, without establishing the deep liquidity required trained, they create a dangerous financial illusion. Investors are lured, ladies and gentlemen, into buying shares only to find out when they want to exit these positions, there are simply no buyers. I'll give an example, ladies and gentlemen, a current epidemic that we are facing, these are zombie stocks. Ladies and gentlemen, as you see across developing countries, exchanges have aggressively lowered standards to allow hundreds of companies to list on the stock exchange. The result is a graveyard of zombie stocks. These companies exist on paper but experience zero daily trading. Retail capital gets locked inside these illiquidated assets, affecting the market at large. I'll ask the good sir to pass on the following evidence detailing this information. Ladies and gentlemen, this can all be coined in two theories. The first one rejected the market microstructure theory and the Roche Motel. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to detail that the market microstructure theory proves that liquidity is the absolute bedrock of an accurate price. Without it, prices are heavily manipulated by a single isolated trade. Furthermore, I'd like to state that behavioral economics illustrates the Roche Motel. Ladies and gentlemen, investors will be unconditionally refused to inject capital into a system they fear that they cannot extract it.
May the speaker pause? An interjection was raised.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honorable stated that liquidity is a cardiovascular system of the capital market. But allow me to state to this House that increasing listed companies is actually the central nervous system of the capital market, because without the central nervous system, the heart is deemed useless because there's nothing to control it. There are no options that are going to be there for people to actually invest in the capital market. That is why we need to list more companies so that the heart can work.
Using my opposition's example, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to state that liquidity is an independent variable, such as the heart has its own source of nervous fibers that allow it to function. So this is what liquidity is. It is unrelated to the stated case. I would like to also finish, ladies and gentlemen, as I continue to illustrate the Roche Motel. It clearly states that investors will unconditionally refuse to inject capital into a system if they fear they cannot easily extract it. Ladies and gentlemen, a sustainable system must function efficiently before it can expand. I'll kindly ask the speaker for 30 seconds to sum up.
20 seconds only.
Thank you. As I conclude, honorable judges, an exchange is an engine of capital. Liquidity is merely the oil. We cannot keep adding parts to the engine without replacing the oil, expecting it not to seize up. It simply will not work. By prioritizing liquidity, we protect investors today and build a robust infrastructure. With this, the government proudly begs to propose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister. We now give an opportunity to the leader of the opposition.
The government states, and I quote, "Capital that cannot move cannot grow." Well, we say, capital that cannot grow dies. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a hungry lion with 5 cash registers, but it only sells 1 box of chicken. We are team opposition, and we move against the topic motion that says that this House believes improving liquidity should take precedence over increasing the number of listed securities. Now, moving into a definition of key terms. Liquidity is the efficiency and ease with which an object, with which an asset can be sold without its market price depreciating. A listed security is any tradable financial asset with monetary value. Now, let's cut through the smoke and mirrors that have been shared by the government and move into this motion. We as team opposition champion the increase of listed securities, or in other words, a range of investable opportunities. This debate is not about quantity versus quality. It is about a fundamental question of sequencing. Our stance is a market must first be broad, inclusive, and representative of the reality of the economy before it can become deeply liquid. Liquidity is not a prerequisite you can simply force when you want it to happen, but rather a natural consequence of a rich, diverse range of investment opportunities. Our call rests on 2 structural realities. First, solving asset scarcity. In many developing and emerging markets, the crisis is not lack of investable money, but instead it is a lack of investable assets. Take a look at our very own Lusaka Security Exchange, established in 1994. Flash forward 36 years later. How many security listings do we have? 26, ladies and gentlemen, in 36 years. Because of this extreme scarcity, massive local capital like our NAPSA pension funds are legally forced to sit idle. Improving liquidity for just those 26 listings does absolutely nothing to help the economy. Hundreds of Zambian businesses are screaming for capital. a lack of investable assets is a far greater bottleneck to the economy than the government can imagine. Furthermore, listings are the true organic catalyst for the liquidity, not the other way around. A comprehensive capital market study published in a peer-reviewed MDPI Systems Journal analyzed volatile and emerging financial systems. The data proved that isolated liquidity measures have virtually zero economic output in the long run, ladies and gentlemen. Instead, the study proved that expanding the roster of public companies acts as a natural magnet for fresh capital. Each new company brings its own unique network of employees, retail investments, and sector-specific funds. The World Bank stated it has developed struggling economies by issuing more securities in terms of equity and bonds, ladies and gentlemen. The World Bank helps economies by issuing more security. This tells you everything you need to know about this debate. Accepted.
To the leader of opposition, I pose the question that if the Lusaka Security Exchange has been there for many years, why is it that we only have 26 listings on today's exchange? And where are we accounting for the small to medium enterprises in your definition? Thank you.
I didn't say anything about small media enterprises. And to answer your question, we only have 26 listings in the Lusaka Security Exchange because we have failed to increase the securities, and thus the economy is struggling, ladies and gentlemen. It is struggling because we have a limited number of securities, and only the big fish in the pond can invest in this. So the economy is not growing, and that is why Zambia is a developing economy, ladies and gentlemen. Now, liquidity is not a law which you can implement when you want to. It is the natural byproduct of diverse representation of the economy. The government is giving you a skin deep cosmetic. They want to polish a tiny paddle and call it 10 seconds to conclude, please.
10 seconds it is.
We cannot trade what does not exist. We build the foundation, the liquid will follow naturally. So let us stock the shelves before we worry about the speed of
Your
selling.
time is up, honorable member.
I rest my case. Thank you.
A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. This is the last debate in the knockout stages. One of these will automatically proceed to the quarterfinals, and one of them, whoever will lose, to depend on how much dignity they lose with, for us to know whether they are proceeding or not. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give an opportunity to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Good morning, esteemed judges, fellow debaters, the floor at large. Or may I just simply say, with the interest of time, all protocols be highly observed. Now, today I stand before you as a foot soldier of the University of Lusaka and the Deputy Prime Minister of the government that proposes to the motion that says this House believes improving liquidity should take precedence over increasing the number of listed securities. Let me start with my first point. Improving liquidity increases investor confidence and attracts capital. Investors care about whether they can buy and sell shares quickly on a volatile and liquid market. I have before you, judges, today evidence on TradingView of the JSE, which is the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And as you can see here, that there is no displayable information. May the Good Samaritan please do us wise. And this here is another chart from the Nifty 50 in India, which basically states the 50 companies that are listed on the Indian Stock Exchange, and this is a price action of a liquid market. Ladies and gentlemen, given in this document I have here, according to Barclays Bank, most traders are technical traders. What do we mean by that? Most traders follow candlestick formation in order to make price decisions or buying decisions based on what they want to buy on their respective stock market. May the Good Samaritan please pass this evidence to the judge. A case study that was done by the IMF on the Lusaka Securities Exchange stated that low liquidity is the main cause of Allowed?
Mr. Speaker, I wonder where the Honorable got his sources about the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. But allow me to quote from this Johannesburg extract. Johannesburg celebrates 20 years since listing its own exchange. Johannesburg in 5th June marks 20 years since listing its own shares on the exchange, representing a significant milestone in evolution from a member-owned organization. And it is one of the largest, most expanded and most liquid exchange, and ranking amongst the 20 members of the House. What does it mean?
Members of the House, as a trader with experience, 10 years in experience, I started trading when I was 18. Let me respond to that. If you can see from that chart there, it's a TradingView chart, which is a free platform that is accessible to each and every global investor around the world. And as you can see there, it clearly says that there is no data in form of candlesticks that is shown there, which represents price action of the value of the stock. As stated here in the IMF paper that I have here, liquidity is low on the loose, in particular page 15 of section C. May the good Samaritan do us wise, stating that liquidity is low on the loose because of the demand for the same stocks and shares. If I move on to my second point, liquidity lowers a firm's cost of capital and promotes economic growth. When markets are liquid, investors accept low returns because they're able to mitigate on those small price movements. Listing many companies without active trading does not improve access to finance. Trader volume promotes higher stock prices and eventually can lead to these companies raising capital for economic expansion. A very good example is a case study that was carried out on the London Stock Exchange Group that says that, according to the LSE, and I quote, "Our markets connect companies with a broad and diverse global investor base, providing efficient access to capital." Now, if the Lusaka Stock Exchange was indeed a liquid stock exchange, why are we finding our very own Zambeef shares listed on the London Stock Exchange? It honestly baffles me how the opposition is able to say that liquidity does not matter when we are taking our shares in the hands of foreign nationals who bring no quality, who bring no money into our country. May the good Samaritan please do as wise. Accepted.
We see that you have made your stance on Nigeria and London, but countries like Zimbabwe, Zambia, Nigeria, and Angola, they have pools of investors and very limited securities. These countries are struggling economically. What do you have to say about this?
I don't remember mentioning Nigeria in my statement, but in order to answer your question, 20 seconds to wind up.
20 seconds it is.
I will answer your question with a theory on illiquidity, where it talks about any form of if there is no trading in a market, it talks about the collapse of trading in instruments and options. With these few points, I'd like to rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you so much, the Deputy Prime Minister. We now allow the Deputy Opposition Leader to come forward and make his submission.
Begin of quotation. The government policy ignores the very people who form the backbone of our domestic economy. Who are these? The retail investors and the citizens looking to build long-term wealth. Members of the House and indeed bona fide affiliates, without further procrastination, may I simply say, or diplomatic etiquette observed. Riding on to my points, let me put this House to order. Members of the House and indeed bona fide affiliates. Liquidity is costly rather than listed securities. What do I mean by that? Members of the House and indeed bona fide affiliates. Liquidity is an endless fuel. But when it comes to listed security, it is a one-time fee. What do I mean by that? When it comes to listed securities, you get to pay maybe 50,000 per year. But let's come to liquidity. Liquidity brings about a number of listed securities to focus on. Do you think they would have had that for members of the House? Definitely not. Members of the House and indeed bona fide affiliates. Let me take you to my second point, which is low collection costs leading to high net yields. Members of the House and indeed bona fide affiliates. I'll allow my first speaker to pass on the evidence that I left on the table. Members of the House and indeed bona fide affiliates. On page 7 of that particular extract, there's a paragraph that's clearly stating that it went down because listed securities were few. Members of the House and indeed bona fide affiliates. Allow me to say, in as much as liquidity is important, yes, we understand, but why should we make it a priority if investors are going to suffer at the end of the day while it's having less listed securities? Members of the House and indeed bona fide affiliates. I forgot to mention in my preamble, capital market brings about two sides. There's primary capital market and secondary capital market. Primary capital market brings about this is where new securities are created and sold. Secondary capital market brings about, this is where existing securities are traded. Members of the House and indeed bona fide affiliates. When you focus on primary market, it brings about 1, liability. Secondly, trust. Thirdly, long-term capital. What do I mean by that? Members of the House and indeed bona fide affiliates. If we have a lot of listed securities introduced in this capital market, investors are going to have various points of entries when they want to invest. Members of the House and indeed bona fide affiliates. I'm going to give a practical example of 3 networks. There's Zamtel, there's Airtel, and there's MTN. Members of the House and indeed bona fide affiliates. If we only had Airtel, members of the House and Airtel network is not going well. Members of the House and indeed bona fide affiliates. It's going to limit investors to focus on that. But let's give an example. If we add Zamtel, if we add MTN, it's going to bring about investors focusing on those other shares that are going to bring more capital and more money, members of the House, to the capital markets. Members of the House and indeed bona fide affiliates. In my humble conclusion, members of the House, let's focus on these domestic economic, which I talked about in my preamble. The retail investors. 20 seconds to sum up. The retail investors and our citizens, us youths that are focusing on looking and to build long-term wealth. With those few and humble convincing points, I submit.
Okay, thank you so much, the Deputy Opposition Leader. Let's remember that this is the last knockout stage debate. One of these, upon winning, will automatically qualify to the quarterfinal. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, let me welcome the government member to make his submission.
Respect to our honorable judges, may I request to ride on the protocol that has already been observed. My name is Bota Patson. Coming from the government side, strongly suggesting this motion, strongly agreeing that this House believes that improving liquidity should take precedence over increasing the number of listed securities. Members of the House, I'll stand on 2 grounds. My first ground being that illiquidity makes new listings meaningless. Members of the House, if we look at evidence from the strategic plan, Good Samaritan, please. Strategic plan, judges come with me on page 18 to 19, we see that the balance scorecard tracks average daily turnover collapsing from 7.3 billion kwacha in 2020 to 2 billion kwacha from 2021 to 2022, with a number of issuers on the main board also failing from 2023, from 28, 23, and 24 over the same years, and every single year from 2018 to 2023. Members of the House, the scores, these were scores that indicate that overall the market has set targets, but the targets were not met. Members of the House, this is direct evidence that turnover and actual listings have declined together, but not move at the same time, indicating that indeed it is important to prioritize liquidity over the number of listings. My second, if we look at judges, come with me. If we look at page 4. On the forward, we look at the CEO's own forward names
which indicates that inadequate market depth, illiquidity, inadequate commodity diversification, and a low market capitalization to GDP are less than 15% as the exchange's main challenges. So we can see that indeed liquidity is the main challenge, as the CEO has actually mentioned. If we go on again to look at page 22, we see the SWOT analysis, and under the threats, we can tell that it has listed to say illiquidity of the market, 1, low retail participation, 2, and low market depth and high interest yield on fixed income securities as external threats. Members of the House, allowed.
Mr. Speaker, just quoting from his evidence, the CEO mentions 3 things, and one of them is inadequate market diversification. And this is what we are bringing to the House today. Because there is inadequate market diversification, you even find that there are people that are unable to actually get into the capital market to actually invest. And this is why we want to improve more listed companies so that even those that have got little funds can actually access the capital market by listing more companies. I beg to differ.
To respond to that, allow me to proceed to look at the case of the 2024 delisting of Taj Pamosi Hotel and the Invest Trust Bank Zambia. Members of the House, if we look at these companies, these were companies that were once on the loose. But this case clearly indicates that it was not because of the few listings that these companies delisted from the loose, but it was because of the lack of sustainability. And we can tell that bringing in more companies when they are not sustaining themselves, it means that nothing is going to happen. And that is why we emphasize as the government to say it is always important to ensure that liquidity takes the right step. Members of the House, if we look at the liquidity preference theory, investors, my good Samaritan, investors demand a premium to hold illiquid assets and will avoid them entirely. So if we look at this theory, it tells us to say, as an investor, the only way I am going to invest is when I'm able to exit a market given the time is there or given the chance is there. I cannot continue to invest in something when I know that at the end of the day it won't benefit me. Members of the House, allow me to proceed to my next ground, which is market depth and price discovery depends on liquidity and not the number of listed companies. Members of the House, market depth is about demand, thereby indicating that investors would desire to trade or invest on the loose. Their desire is not dependent on the number of listed securities. Instead, 30 seconds to wrap up.
20 seconds.
In my conclusion, we request that you weigh the demonstrated reality of the looses in illiquidity, the thin daily turnover, and the recent delistings as proof that structurally thin markets cannot be fixed. I beg to rest my case.
Such a spirited submission. Another round of applause for the honorable member. Okay, we now allow the opposition member to come forward and make her submission.
This debate is not about whether liquidity is important. It certainly is. The real question is whether it should take precedence over expanding the number of listed securities. We believe it should not. Liquidity refers to the ability of investors that they can buy and sell securities. Liquidity does not mean inclusion. What does inclusion refer to? Inclusion refers to who can participate in capital marketing. This refers to both companies seeking finance and investors looking for opportunities. A market can be highly liquid but can still exclude SMEs and startups that cannot list, new sectors of economy, and retail investors with limited investment choices. Liquidity alone doesn't make a capital market inclusive. Liquidity alone does not make a capital market inclusive because it's like you can't have fruits without roots. And if your roots are shallow, best believe your harvest will have no meaning. And if you do harvest, very little. Moving on. Yes, thank you. According to the OECD, there is some information there, but according to the OECD, it explains that low liquidity discourages investor participation, but it also notes that broader issue of participation, which means more companies listing on exchanges, is necessary to expand market access and make equity viable. It also recommends that increasing listing alongside improving liquidity, not prioritizing one over the other. What the government is trying to say is that we should prioritize one over another, which is not the main debate here. I mean, it is the main debate, but it's of no essence. The World Bank also states, accepted.
Members of the House, the opposition talks about market diversification, obviously not on this speaker, but you cannot diversify in a market that has very inaccurate price listings, because one large trade can wipe out people that are on the opposite side. So may they please clarify on that.
Can you come again? Okay, moving on as if I was not disturbed. Liquidity does not expand the capital market or create diversification. A capital market has two major functions. The first being helping companies raise long-term capital, emphasis on long-term capital. Providing investors with investment opportunities is the second major function. Liquidity mainly improves the secondary market where existing securities are traded. The number of listed securities, if we improve them, only strengthens the primary market because more companies can raise money for growth. If there are too few listed companies, investors keep trading, but then they keep trading for the same shares. That improves activity, but at what cost? It improves activities, but that does not expand the economy. Moving on, the government argues that liquidity should come first, but investors like active markets would disagree. You have a busier market, they want to have a busier market, but we want to have a bigger market. A market becomes generally deep because it has more companies and sectors and investment products. When there are many companies, more industries, more bonds, more investment products, and more investors, this leads to more investors entering the market because they have a greater choice to make the right decisions. Also moving on, we have an example of, we have evidence based on a World Bank speech.
The opposition advances the proposition that the sheer breadth of listed securities is the ultimate measure of a thriving capital market. Ladies and gentlemen, you can have a huge market but have no sales or any fruit in it, as she mentioned earlier, that are being sold. So can she please clarify how having this a huge list of securities helps with the economy of buying and selling when it comes to buying and selling?
Government, I would love for you to acknowledge that dormancy is caused by weak participation and poor market infrastructure and not by having more listed companies. Solution is better. The better solution is market development. So what the dormancy is that it is caused by weak participation. Yes, we may have more listed companies, but then if your infrastructure is weak and you don't have better marketing development, then it is also going to yield negative effects either ways. And then moving on again. Moving on, a World Bank speech on capital market development also argues that resilient markets require both breadth and depth. It describes how Nigeria expanded listing rules.
Your time is up, Honorable Member.
30 seconds to summarize.
20 seconds only.
Liquidity is important, but it is a means, not the end. The real purpose of a capital market is to connect capital with the widest possible range of businesses. Expanding the market is what ultimately creates sustainable liquidity. I rest my case.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for the Honorable Member. So just a caution to the speakers, especially for the debates that are coming up, seeing as for this one interjections are done. When you're interjected, in response, it's not a direct response to the person that interjected, but you remain in contact with the audience. So please take note of that to all the speakers that will be coming forth. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, let's please welcome the whip of the government.
To the Speaker of the House, to the esteemed panel of judges, to the opposition members, and to the members of this House, my salutations of the day. I'm here, if you allow me to ride on the already existing protocol, I'm here to close the case for the government. This House has assembled to debate whether improving liquidity should take precedence over increasing the number of listed securities. The government says yes. My name is Maita, and as your government whip, I'm here to show you why our arguments make this motion inevitable. Our first argument that we presented established that liquidity actually is the lifeblood of every financial market. We demonstrated that without liquidity, investors become trapped, zombie stocks emerge, and price discovery breaks down. Why get into something that you're not sure that you can get out of? Through market microstructure theory and the Roach Motel effect, we showed that investors will not commit capital to a market if they fear that they cannot easily exit it. The second speaker gave evidence earlier that if liquidity wasn't a major problem in our markets, then we wouldn't have a problem where Zambeef shares, which are actually owned by a Zambian company, are actually on the London Stock Exchange. What is Zambeef doing on the London Stock Exchange? Zambeef had to go and look for foreign capital elsewhere. Liquidity actually is a problem. Our third point brought the principle home. Using Lucey's own trading data, Keynes' liquidity preference theory, Carl's market microstructure theory, and the very design of Zambia's Security Act, we showed that Zambia's capital market was deliberately built to concentrate liquidity before expanding breadth. We demonstrated that increasing the number of listed securities in an already thin market merely spreads scarce trading even further. We'd also like to thank the opposition for supporting us when they said that a market is not, market support is, okay, I'm gonna skip that point. Members of this House, in a study by Kalenga, Kaira, Sishumba, and Silwanji in 2026, writing in the African Journal of Commercial Studies, analyzed 48 months of data from 20 companies listed in the Lusaka Securities Exchange. May the Good Samaritan do as wise. I invite you, the judges, to read the purpose in the abstract highlighted, where they describe Lucey as a frontier market characterized by low liquidity, thin trading, information asymmetry, and market inefficiency. These are not our words. These are the words of Zambian researchers studying Zambia's own stock exchange. I also invite the study Pharma French five-factor model. We've got strong numbers here. We've got 93.1% of stock returns, while the CART model had 92.4%. Yet with these strong explanatory models, the market remains characterized, described as thin trading and low liquidity. What does this tell us? It tells us that no matter how sophisticated our financial models become, they cannot compensate for a market where investors can't trade securities efficiently. Without liquidity, prices become less reliable. Without active trading, capital is allocated less efficiently. And without confidence, investors will just stay away. Members of this House, the evidence becomes even stronger. I'll ask the Good Samaritan to do as wise. A study by Kapsana and Mwange in 2025, also writing in the African Journal of Commercial Studies, found that 57.2% of respondents believed poor investor education contributed to poor investment decisions, while more than half criticized the regulatory framework as unclear and rigid. I'd like to counter what the opposition said. This, in fact, isn't a quantity problem. It's a quality problem. You can't trust the facts. You can't trust the numbers. Esteemed adjudicators, the opposition would have us measure success by the number of quantities listed on an exchange. We ask you to measure success by something far, far more important. Can investors confidently buy? Can they confidently sell? Can capital... 20 seconds to summarize?
20 seconds it is.
Okay. Can capital move freely to its most productive use? A stock exchange is not a catalog of companies. It's a marketplace. And a marketplace where nothing moves is not a market at all. For the sake of investor confidence, efficient price discovery, sustainable economic growth, and the long-term integrity of our great nation's capital market, we beg to propose. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The University of Lusaka, the government in this case, has concluded their argument. Let's now allow the opposition to do the same. The whip of the opposition, it's your time.
All diplomatic etiquette in its order of seniority is highly observed. Supply creates its own demand. You cannot improve liquidity, which is a trading activity, in a ghost town. You must first build the town that is listing more companies. Members of the House Affiliates Association, riding on the protocols that were earlier observed, allow me to begin by rebattling some of the misconceptions that the government brought to this House. The first speaker came and spoke about capital markets and spoke to say capital market that does not move does not grow. Members of the House, allow me to reiterate to this House that growth enables movement due to more options. A bona fide affiliate association, you cannot have a market that is going to move without it having grown. Even for a child, for them to be able to move, they must take the necessary steps for them to actually grow, and that is when you'll be able to see them move. The second speaker came in and spoke about the fact, the notion that liquidity does not, that they speculated that we are saying that liquidity does not matter, but this is not what we are bringing to this August House today. We are stating to this House that we should not make liquidity, or rather improving an already existing liquidity, we should not make it a precedence over increasing the number of companies that need to be there on the capital market, because this is going to limit the options that people are going to have in terms of accessing this market. Members of the House Affiliates Association, the third speaker said illiquidity makes capital market useless. The third speaker came and spoke about the issue of illiquidity on the capital market, and then this is what we are bringing to this August House. When we have inadequate companies being available on the capital market, it is going to create an atmosphere that is going to make it hard for people to actually come on it and look for options for which they can trade on. What benefit is liquidity going to have on the capital market when there is a limited number of options with which people can invest in? Even if liquidity would be present on the capital market, if what I want to trade on does not exist on the capital market, illiquidity is going to be useless. This liquidity is going to be useless because it does not prove to be inclusive of the various options that a person would want to invest in. And this is why we are saying we should increase the listed number of companies on the capital market. Members of the House, as if the misconception was not enough, the summarizer came in and spoke on the notion to say our market is not illiquid. A bona fide affiliate association, further stating to say the foundation of the capital market is liquidity. Members of the House, if indeed liquidity is the foundation of the capital market, then if our market is illiquid, then the capital market should not exist. But what do we have? We have a capital market, we have liquidity. The bone of contention of today's motion is about improving the already existing liquidity. Members of the House, if liquidity already exists, what we need to improve right now is the number of listed companies. And allow me to state an example about the previous trade that went on with the Airtel company. They were able to do their trade successfully. This just goes to show that the market that we have is actually liquid, and we need to increase more listed companies on the capital market. Members of the House Affiliates Association, as if that is not enough, we want to tell this August House that we do not necessarily say that liquidity is useless. No, members of the House, what we are trying to avoid in this session is taking the route that we have taken for a number of years and still continue with it. Members of the House, since 1990, just like my first speaker stated here, we only have about 26 companies listed on the Lusaka Stock Exchange market. Members of the House Affiliates Association, that is not good for a developing country like ours. What we need is more options, more listed companies to grow our market, to grow the number of people that are going to come onto the capital market and make it viable for our economy to actually be able to be sustainable. Now, allow me to bring you back to the team opposition, why we are standing in this stance to oppose the motion of making liquidity, improving liquidity, a precedence in today's discussion. Number one, the first speaker spoke about increasing the number of listed companies as it necessitates the improvement of liquidity. Members of the House Affiliates Association, if there are more companies I can wish to trade on, it is going to necessitate the Lusaka Stock Exchange to actually improve the liquidity. Members of the House Affiliates Association, of what importance is the ease of trading if there is nothing to trade on? It's a food for thought. Members of the House Affiliates Association, this is going to enable us to actually expand the capital market, and this is what we need for a growing economy. As if that is not enough, the second speaker came in, and as I summarize on the second speaker, long-term economical development is 20 seconds to sum up.
20 seconds it is.
Allow me to sum up by stating the recommendations. Number one, we need listing of more companies, and improving liquidity should run simultaneously. Secondly, we need to have a mandate that strategically improves listed companies in key national sectors. We need to leverage local pension funds and retail platforms to build organic demand. Members of the House Affiliates Association, if what I want to trade on does not exist, I rest my case.
Okay, thank you so much to both the University of Lusaka and Eden University. Well done. Congratulations on reaching this far. One of you may have to leave the competition. We'll soon find out. But before that, please shake hands as you leave the stage. Let's give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so we've come to the end of the knockout stages. Next up are the quarterfinals. We will allow the judges to deliberate, and then we will see what comes next. So for now, we'll have a short break as we wait for that. Thank you.